A distant rumble echoed across the gray skies above New Eden, a city once bustling with promise, but now marked by the scars of conflict and reconstruction. Captain Ryan Jones stood at the edge of the military base's northern perimeter, his weathered face illuminated by the soft glow of dawn. The quiet hum of the morning was a fragile veneer masking the tension that gripped the planet. Humanity had seen its share of wars, but nothing had prepared it for this. Jones adjusted the brim of his cap and surveyed the horizon through his binoculars. "No signs of trouble yet," he muttered, lowering them. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Mason Briggs, leaned against a sandbag wall, the tip of a cigarette glowing faintly. "Give it time," Briggs said, exhaling smoke. "Aliens don't send those cryptic messages unless they're planning something." The day before, a massive alien ship had descended into Earth orbit. The Galactic Empire, as they called themselves, had made their intentions clear in a broadcast that played across every device on the planet. Surrender and submit to imperial rule, or face obliteration. Their ambassador, Overseer Talrock, had sneered as he mocked Earth's defenses, laughing at what he called primitive relics of an obsolete era. Ryan clenched his jaw at the memory. The broadcast had been as humiliating as it was infuriating. The Empire had dismissed Earth's capabilities outright, scoffing at the notion that anything as antiquated as bullets and steel could stand against their plasma-based arsenal. It was a gut punch to every soldier still loyal to a planet struggling to regain its footing. "Captain," a voice broke the tension. Private Daniel sprinted toward them, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. "Command's got eyes on the alien ship. They're deploying something. Troop carriers, maybe." Ryan nodded, his mind already racing. "Get the men ready." Full alert, Daniel saluted and ran off, his youthful energy a sharp contrast to the grim weight Jones carried. He turned to Briggs, who had stubbed out his cigarette and was already strapping on his gear. "They're testing us," Jones said. Briggs shrugged. "Then we'd better make sure they regret it." Within minutes, the base buzzed with activity. Soldiers rushed to their posts, and weapons were checked and rechecked. Ryan walked through the ranks, stopping occasionally to offer a word of encouragement or adjust a soldier's stance. The men trusted him, not just because of his rank, but because he had been in the trenches with them before. He understood the fear they felt and shared their defiance. At the center of the base's armory sat an old, hulking piece of machinery, a Browning M2 heavy machine gun, affectionately called Big Bertha by the veterans. The weapon was a relic, a throwback to wars long past, but it had earned its place through sheer reliability. Jones placed a hand on the cold steel, his thoughts momentarily drifting. "Thinks she still has it in her?" Briggs asked, appearing at his side. "If she doesn't, we're screwed," Ryan replied with a grim smile. "But yeah, she'll do." Above them, the sky darkened. The massive alien ship descended lower, blotting out the sun. Its metallic hull shimmered with an unnatural light, and strange symbols glowed along its edges. Moments later, smaller craft broke away, descending rapidly toward the Earth. The sound of their engines roared like a storm, shaking the ground as they approached. Ryan grabbed a radio. "All units, positions now. This is not a drill." The troop carriers landed with a precision that spoke to the Empire's confidence. Their doors slid open, revealing soldiers clad in sleek, metallic exosuits. They marched out in perfect formation, their movements synchronized, their weapons humming with energy. At the forefront of the formation stood an officer, his helmet adorned with intricate carvings. He raised a hand, and the troops halted. "Humans," his voice boomed, amplified by some unseen technology. "You are commanded to lay down your arms and submit. Resistance is futile." Ryan stepped forward, his stance unyielding. "This is Earth," he said, his voice carrying across the field. "We don't submit. Not to you, not to anyone." The officer tilted his head, a gesture that might have been curiosity or disdain. "So be it. You will witness the futility of your defiance." The alien troops began to advance, their weapons glowing with an ominous blue light. Ryan raised his hand, signaling his men to hold their fire. He waited, his heart pounding in his chest. Timing was everything. "Steady," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The alien soldiers crossed the first marker Ryan had set, a patch of open ground deliberately left unprotected. They moved with precision, their confidence palpable. When they reached the second marker, Ryan dropped his hand. "Fire!" The machine gun roared to life, its deafening staccato echoing across the battlefield. Bullets tore through the air, striking the alien troops with brutal efficiency. The exosuits, designed to withstand energy-based attacks, crumpled under the relentless onslaught of kinetic force. Sparks flew, and alien soldiers fell, their formations breaking as chaos erupted. Briggs let out a low whistle as he watched the scene unfold. Guess they weren't ready for old-fashioned lead. The aliens scrambled for cover, their arrogance replaced by confusion and fear. The officer shouted commands, his voice lost amid the cacophony of gunfire and dying screams. Ryan didn't let up. "Keep it up. Don't let them regroup." The machine gun's barrel glowed red-hot, but the onslaught didn't waver. One by one, the alien troops fell, their advanced weaponry useless against the sheer ferocity of Earth's defense. The tide turned so quickly it left even Ryan momentarily stunned. Within minutes, the surviving aliens retreated, their once proud ranks reduced to scattered remnants. The officer, now helmetless and visibly shaken, glared at Ryan before retreating with his troops. The battlefield fell silent, save for the distant hum of the alien craft retreating to their ship. Ryan lowered his rifle, his breath heavy. Around him, his men began to cheer, their victory as unexpected as it was exhilarating. But Jones didn't join them. He knew this was only the beginning. Briggs approached, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "Not bad for a bunch of relics, huh?" Ryan allowed himself a small smile. "Let's see if they're still laughing up there." Above, the alien mothership loomed ominously, its lights flickering as if in anger. Jones knew the Empire would return, stronger and more determined. But for now, Earth had sent a message of its own. Humanity wasn't going down without a fight. The air over the battlefield hung heavy with smoke, the bitter stench of charred earth mingling with the acrid tang of discharged gunpowder. Captain Ryan Jones paced behind the line of sandbags, his sharp gaze sweeping across his men as they reinforced their positions. The alien troops had retreated, but Jones knew the reprieve was temporary. The Galactic Empire would not accept humiliation lightly. "Stay sharp," he said, his voice low but firm. "They'll come back harder. Count on it." His soldiers nodded, their faces grim but resolute. Private Daniels crouched next to the Browning M2 heavy machine gun, affectionately patting its side as if it were a trusted comrade. "Big Bertha really earned her keep today, huh?" Daniels said, his attempt at levity barely masking the tension in his voice. "She did her job," Jones replied. "Now it's on us to make sure she gets the chance to do it again." Overhead, the alien mothership pulsed with an eerie, rhythmic glow. It hovered like a malevolent storm cloud, its sleek surface a stark contrast to the scorched and battered earth below. From its underbelly, new troop carriers descended in disciplined formations, their engines emitting a deep, resonant hum. Jones's radio crackled, and Lieutenant Mason Briggs' voice came through, steady and calm despite the urgency. "They're deploying reinforcements. Cap looks like a mix of infantry and heavier units. I'm seeing something different this time. Might be tanks." "Copy that," Jones responded. He turned to Daniels and gestured toward the machine gun. "Get her ready. We're not done yet." The ground trembled as the alien carriers touched down, releasing their payload with mechanical precision. This time, the Empire's forces moved with even greater confidence, their shimmering exosuits reflecting the orange glow of the setting sun. The soldiers advanced in perfect unison, their plasma rifles raised and ready. Behind them came sleek, floating hover tanks, their turrets swiveling with a deadly grace. Jones's jaw tightened. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The Empire wasn't just retaliating. They were making a statement. These troops were more than soldiers. They were a show of power, a demonstration of superiority meant to crush resistance before it could spread. "Briggs," Jones said into his radio, "are the traps set?" "Locked and loaded," Briggs replied. "Just give the word." Jones raised his binoculars and studied the advancing forces. The alien soldiers moved with an almost machine-like precision, their helmets obscuring any hint of emotion. They were supremely confident, unbothered by the fate of the first wave. The tanks glided forward, their energy shields flickering faintly as they absorbed stray debris from the battlefield. "Wait for my signal," Jones ordered. The human soldiers crouched behind their defenses, the silence stretching taut as a wire. The only sounds were the faint hum of alien technology and the occasional crackle of static from a soldier's radio. When the alien infantry reached the outer perimeter, Jones gave a sharp nod. "Now!" A deafening explosion ripped through the air as one of the traps detonated, a cluster of mines buried beneath the loose soil. The blast tore through the first ranks of alien troops, sending armored bodies tumbling like broken marionettes. Smoke and dust erupted in a blinding cloud, shrouding the battlefield in chaos. "Open fire!" Jones barked. The human line erupted in a storm of bullets and grenades. The heavy machine gun roared again, spitting death with relentless fury. Daniels worked the weapon with grim determination, his teeth bared in a fierce grin as he unleashed its fury on the advancing troops. The bullets ripped through exosuits and shattered visors, leaving the once imposing soldiers crumpled in the dirt. But this time, the Empire's forces didn't falter. The surviving infantry regrouped with practiced efficiency, using the wreckage of their fallen comrades as cover. The hover tanks advanced, their turrets locking onto the human positions. "Incoming!" Briggs shouted over the radio. A beam of searing blue plasma lanced out from one of the tanks, striking a sandbag wall and disintegrating it in a burst of superheated energy. Jones ducked as the shockwave knocked him off his feet. Around him, soldiers scrambled to reposition, their shouts mixing with the cacophony of battle. "Focus fire on the tanks," Jones ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. Briggs and a small team of soldiers emerged from cover, hauling a shoulder-mounted rocket launcher into position. The first rocket streaked across the battlefield, striking a tank squarely in its energy shield. The shield flared brightly but held, the tank continuing its inexorable advance. "They're tougher than they look," Briggs muttered, loading another rocket. "Hit it again," Jones said, "and aim for the weak spots." The second rocket found its mark, striking the base of the tank's turret where the shield was weakest. The explosion tore through the vehicle's sleek frame, sending shards of alien metal flying in all directions. The tank shuddered and collapsed, a plume of fire and smoke marking its demise. A cheer went up from the human line, but it was short-lived. The remaining tanks retaliated with brutal precision, their plasma cannons wreaking havoc on the human defenses. Jones watched in horror as a group of his men were caught in the blast, their screams swallowed by the roar of destruction. "Hold the line," he shouted, his voice raw with desperation. The machine gun thundered on, its barrel glowing red-hot as Daniels pushed it to its limits. Beside him, Corporal Hayes fed the ammunition belt with practiced speed, his hands trembling but steady. "They just keep coming," Hayes yelled. "They'll stop when we make them stop," Jones growled, firing his rifle at an advancing squad of infantry. Despite the overwhelming odds, the human defenders fought with a ferocity born of desperation. Every inch of ground was contested, every alien soldier met with a hail of bullets and shrapnel. The battlefield became a chaotic, bloody tableau, the lines between victory and defeat blurring with each passing second. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the alien advance began to waver. The destruction of 2 more tanks, combined with the relentless assault of the heavy machine gun, broke the cohesion of their forces. The surviving infantry retreated, their once imposing ranks reduced to scattered remnants. As the last of the alien troops disappeared into the smoke, a tense silence fell over the battlefield. Jones stood amidst the wreckage, his body aching from the strain of combat. Around him, his men began to regroup, their faces etched with exhaustion and disbelief. "They're pulling back," Briggs said, his voice tinged with both relief and suspicion. "For now." Jones nodded, his gaze fixed on the alien mothership looming in the distance. It hadn't moved, its dark silhouette a constant reminder of the Empire's presence. He knew this was only a temporary victory, a test of Earth's resolve. "They underestimated us," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Briggs glanced at him, and next time, Jones's grip on his rifle tightened. "Next time, they'll bring everything they've got, and so will we." The setting sun bathed the battlefield in a fiery glow, casting long shadows over the ruins of the alien assault. Despite the destruction, there was a glimmer of hope in the eyes of Jones's men. They had faced the Empire's wrath and survived. For now, that was enough. The battlefield lay in uneasy silence, the kind that seeps into your bones and forces you to listen for the next inevitable move. Captain Ryan Jones stood with his arms crossed, his brow furrowed as he stared at the horizon. The smoke had settled, revealing a landscape littered with alien bodies and the charred remains of their hover tanks. It was a victory, but it felt hollow. Every man on this side of the line knew what was coming next. "They're regrouping," Lieutenant Briggs said, stepping up beside him. His voice carried a gruff edge, but his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. "I give it less than an hour before they hit us again. Harder this time." Ryan nodded without looking at him. He wasn't a man who needed predictions. He could feel it in the air. The Empire's pride was wounded, and nothing in their behavior suggested they were the kind to lick their wounds quietly. They'd come back not just to win, but to annihilate. "We don't have an hour," Ryan said finally, breaking the silence. "Get Daniels and Hayes to start reloading Big Bertha. We'll need her ready." Briggs hesitated, glancing at the men behind the sandbags. "Morale's low, Cap. They're shaken. We lost too many in that last push." Ryan turned, his face hard. "So we give them something to fight for. They need to see that we're not beaten, that we're not going down without a fight." Briggs nodded and moved off, barking orders to the men, who responded with sluggish movements but focused eyes. Ryan watched them for a moment before turning his attention back to the sky. The alien mothership still loomed, its massive form casting a shadow over everything. It hadn't moved, its presence a constant reminder of their enemy's superiority. The sound of boots on gravel drew his attention. Corporal Hayes jogged up, his face streaked with soot and sweat. "Sir," the scouts reported in. "They've spotted heavy movement about 3 clicks east. Looks like they're bringing in more than just infantry this time." Ryan's stomach tightened. He had expected reinforcements, but the look in Hayes' eyes suggested something worse. "Details?" "Mech, sir. Big ones. The kind that could level this base in minutes." Ryan let out a slow breath, his mind racing. The heavy machine gun had worked miracles against the alien infantry, but against towering war machines equipped with energy shields and enough firepower to rival a tank battalion, it wouldn't be enough. Not alone. "Get the engineers to rig more explosives," Ryan said. "If we can't beat their armor head-on, we'll bleed them out with traps. Funnel them into kill zones." Hayes nodded and turned to leave, but Ryan stopped him. "And tell the men, remind them that this is Earth. We don't quit. Not today." As Hayes disappeared into the chaos of the base, Ryan moved to the center of the encampment, where Briggs was helping to reinforce the barricades. The lieutenant looked up as Ryan approached, sensing the gravity in his step. "They've got mechs," Ryan said simply. Briggs let out a low whistle. "Well, isn't that just fantastic? We'll need every trick we've got to hold them off," Ryan said. "Can you handle the explosives?" Briggs gave a grim smile. "I was born to blow things up. Cap, don't worry about me. Ryan clasped his shoulder briefly before moving on, his focus shifting to the task of rallying his men. He walked the line, stopping to speak to each squad. His words weren't polished or grand, but they carried weight because they came from a man who would stand beside them when the time came. By the time the alien reinforcements arrived, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the battlefield into twilight. The first sign of the Empire's return was the sound, a low, thunderous rumble that vibrated through the ground. Then, through the haze, the silhouettes of the Mets appeared. They towered over the landscape, their metallic forms bristling with weaponry. Between their legs, squads of alien infantry advanced, their exocets gleaming under the pale light of the stars. Ryan stood at the barricade, his rifle slung over his shoulder as he watched the enemy approach. Beside him, Briggs adjusted the detonator for the mines they had planted along the eastern perimeter. Behind them, Daniels manned the heavy machine gun, his hands steady despite the sweat dripping from his brow. "They're bringing the whole damn arsenal," Briggs muttered. Ryan didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the lead mech, a hulking monstrosity with twin plasma cannons mounted on its shoulders. He could feel the weight of every decision he'd made bearing down on him. If they failed here, it wouldn't just be the base that fell. The Empire would see Earth as a conquered world, ripe for the taking. The Mets halted just outside the minefield, their heads swiveling as if scanning for threats. Ryan could almost hear the hum of their targeting systems locking onto his men. The infantry behind them spread out, moving with the precision of soldiers who had been bred for war. "Wait for it," Ryan said, his voice low but steady. The lead mech stepped forward, its massive foot triggering one of the buried mines. The explosion lit up the night, sending a shockwave through the battlefield. Shrapnel tore into the alien ranks, ripping through armor and flesh alike. The mech staggered, one of its legs damaged, but it didn't fall. "Hit it now!" Ryan shouted. The heavy machine gun roared to life, spitting a torrent of bullets at the damaged mech. Sparks flew as the round struck its weakened armor, and with a groan of tortured metal, the machine collapsed to the ground. Daniels let out a triumphant whoop, but the celebration was short-lived. The other Mets opened fire, their plasma cannons unleashing beams of blue energy that tore through the human defenses. Ryan dove for cover as one of the barricades exploded, the force of the blast knocking him to the ground. Around him, men screamed and scrambled to hold their positions. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning metal. "Briggs!" Ryan yelled into his radio. "We need those other traps now." "I'm working on it." Briggs' voice crackled back. "These things aren't exactly cooperative." Ryan gritted his teeth and pushed himself to his feet. The line was faltering, but it wasn't broken yet. He grabbed his rifle and fired at an advancing squad of infantry, the recoil jolting through his shoulder. Beside him, Daniels kept the machine gun going, its barrel glowing red-hot as it unleashed hell. Briggs' voice came through the radio again. "Fire in the hole." A second series of explosions ripped through the battlefield, this time targeting the advancing infantry. The ground heaved as the blast sent alien soldiers flying, their once imposing formation reduced to chaos. Ryan seized the opportunity. "Push forward," he yelled. "Don't give them time to regroup." His men responded with a ferocity born of desperation, surging out from their defenses to counterattack. The battle devolved into brutal, close-quarters combat, the line between victory and defeat growing thinner with every passing second. By the time the smoke began to clear, the battlefield was a graveyard of metal and flesh. The Mets lay in smoldering heaps, their once unstoppable forms reduced to scrap. The surviving alien infantry had retreated, leaving behind their dead and wounded. Ryan stood amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving as he surveyed the scene. Around him, his men regrouped, their faces grim but victorious. The base still stood, but the cost had been steep. "They'll come back," Briggs said, limping up beside him. His voice was heavy with exhaustion. Ryan nodded. "Yeah, and so will we." Above them, The alien mothership loomed like a silent predator, its lights flickering as if in frustration. The fight wasn't over, but for now they had held. The night sky burned with faint streaks of alien lights, a quiet mockery of the calm Earth once knew. Captain Ryan Jones stood at the edge of the shattered barricade, the faint orange glow of smoldering wreckage outlining his battered silhouette. Around him, his men moved with quiet urgency, gathering weapons, checking wounds, and whispering to each other as though raising their voices might tempt fate to strike again. The air was thick with smoke and the metallic tang of blood, but none of it seemed to faze Jones. His focus was on the alien mothership above, its unyielding presence like a dagger held over their throats. Lieutenant Briggs approached, limping slightly, his face drawn but determined. The engineers have salvaged what they could, but its slim pickings, Cap ammo's running low. Explosives, too. Daniels thinks Big Bertha's barrel might melt if we push her any harder. Ryan nodded, his eyes never leaving the distant ship. What about comms? Still jammed. Whatever signal-blocking tech they're using, it's top-notch. No help's coming, not unless we take that mothership down. The words hung between them, heavy and impossible. The very thought of taking on a craft of that size with their dwindling resources was suicidal, and yet it was the only way to turn the tide. The Empire would not relent. Jones knew it as surely as he knew the ground beneath his boots. The aliens viewed humanity as nothing more than an inconvenience, a stubborn, backward species that needed to be eradicated to make way for their expansion. And yet, the men behind him had fought with a ferocity that even the Galactic Empire hadn't anticipated. Jones couldn't let that fire be snuffed out. "We take out the mothership," Ryan said finally, his voice calm and resolute. Briggs let out a short, bitter laugh. "With what, Cap?" "Harsh language. We'd need an army of rocket launchers just to scratch that thing. We're not taking it down with brute force," Jones said, his mind racing through the possibilities. "We'll hit them where they're vulnerable, inside. They've been so focused on flexing their firepower, they haven't considered the risk of ground forces getting aboard. That arrogance is our opening." Briggs' expression shifted, skepticism giving way to a glimmer of hope. "You're serious." "Dead serious," Ryan replied. He turned to the men, raising his voice to cut through the din of whispered conversations. "Listen up. The mothership's the key to this fight. If we don't take it out, they'll keep coming until there's nothing left of us or this planet. I'm not waiting for that to happen, and neither should you." The soldiers stopped what they were doing, their weary faces turning to him. There was fear in their eyes, but there was also a spark of determination. Jones pressed on. "We've already proven they're not invincible. They underestimated us before, and they'll do it again. If we can get aboard that ship, we'll find a way to disable it. Maybe even bring it down." A murmur rippled through the group. Daniel stepped forward, gripping the strap of his rifle tightly. "You've got a plan, sir?" Ryan gave a grim smile. "Not yet, but we'll come up with one on the way." The path to the mothership was a gauntlet of destruction, under cover of darkness. Jones led a small strike team through the craters and debris that marked the battlefield. The Empire's ground forces had pulled back to regroup, giving the humans a narrow window to approach the massive craft unnoticed. As they neared the ship, its true scale became terrifyingly apparent. The hull rose like a metallic mountain, its surface smooth and seamless except for the faint glow of energy conduits running along its length. The only entry point they could see was a docking bay, its massive doors ajar as alien vehicles moved in and out. "We're going in through there," Jones said, pointing to the bay. "Once we're inside, we split up. Briggs, you take your team to the engineering section and look for anything that looks important. Reactors, power cores, whatever keeps this thing running. Daniels, you're with me. We'll head to their command deck and see if we can take control or at least cause some chaos." Briggs nodded, his jaw set. "And if we don't make it out, then we make sure we take as many of them with us as we can," Jones said without hesitation. With a final check of their weapons, the team moved toward the docking bay. They slipped through the shadows, evading the alien patrols with a combination of luck and sheer determination. When they reached the entrance, Jones signaled for the group to halt. "Last chance to back out," he said, his voice low but firm. No one moved. "Good," he said. "Let's do this." Inside, the ship was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, all bathed in an otherworldly blue light. The air was unervingly sterile, and the faint hum of machinery was the only sound. Jones kept his rifle at the ready, his senses heightened as they moved deeper into the ship. The first encounter came quickly. A squad of alien soldiers rounded a corner, their helmets glinting as their plasma rifles swung up to fire. Jones dropped to one knee and opened fire, his shots finding their marks with brutal efficiency. Daniels covered him, the heavy crack of his rifle echoing through the corridor. Within moments, the aliens were down. "Keep moving," Jones said, his voice tight. "They'll know we're here now." The team pressed on, splitting into two groups as planned. Jones led Daniels and a handful of others toward the upper levels, their path marked by increasingly sophisticated technology. The corridors grew wider, the walls lined with displays and interfaces that Jones couldn't begin to comprehend. When they reached the command deck, the resistance was heavier. Alien officers shouted orders in their guttural language, directing soldiers into defensive positions. Jones's team fought their way through with a ferocity born of desperation, using grenades and sheer grit to clear the room. As the last alien fell, Jones rushed to one of the consoles. The interface was incomprehensible, but he didn't need to understand it completely. He just needed to cause chaos. "Daniels, give me some cover," he said, pulling out a small device. It was a makeshift EMP generator, cobbled together by their engineers for a mission just like this. "You think that'll work?" Daniels asked, firing at an alien reinforcement attempting to enter the room. "It'll have to," Jones replied. He activated the device and slammed it onto the console. Sparks flew, and the ship shuddered as the EMP pulsed through its systems. Lights flickered, and the hum of machinery grew erratic. Jones could only hope Briggs' team had found their target as well. The radio crackled to life, and Briggs' voice came through. "We hit the reactor, Cap. This thing's not staying in the air much longer." Ryan allowed himself a brief moment of relief. "Good. Get your team out of there." "What about you?" "We'll find a way," Jones said. The ship groaned ominously, its once perfect stability beginning to falter. Jones turned to Daniels. "Time to go." They fought their way back through the corridors, the ship's internal systems malfunctioning around them. Alien soldiers scrambled in confusion, their discipline faltering as their ship began to fail. By the time Jones and his team reached the docking bay, the ground was trembling beneath their feet. "Get to the evac point," Jones shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. As they sprinted across the bay, the mothership's engines let out a deafening roar. The craft tilted, its massive form beginning to descend toward the earth. Jones didn't look back. When they finally reached the safety of the battlefield, they turned to watch as the alien mothership plummeted, its lights flickering one final time before it slammed into the ground with a cataclysmic crash. The explosion lit up the night, a brilliant, fiery testament to humanity's refusal to bow. Jones stood in silence, his chest heaving as the shockwave washed over him. Around him, his men stared in awe. The tide had turned. For the first time, the Galactic Empire had been dealt a blow it couldn't ignore. Jones knew the war was far from over, but for now, they had won the day.